time, for the sake of our beautiful Zoom and YouTube audience, we are starting at 11 o'clock sharp. Welcome to Community Church of Boston. We call ourselves a Peace and Justice congregation since 1920. We also call ourselves a free pulpit in action. That's one we haven't used in a while, but it is a pulpit. We bought a pulpit when our old one that we'd had for decades was falling apart, and we under here was there was a cross. There was a cross, and the cross, it means a lot to a lot of people, and I was just at my late friend Jim Thomas's house cleaning out his apartment. He's a very committed atheist, Mexican-American atheist in Los Angeles. And he brought he had in his apartment like 20 crosses. And that meant a lot to me, and some of them were just beautiful crosses from Mexico, like painted flowers and birds and stuff on the cross. It's like getting rid of this symbol of capital punishment and death and negativity and yes, resurrection. But anyway, we were able to do the option that the pulpit company offered of turning around the cross and having just a blank slate. We've since had several things on the front. One was all welcome, and now we have this little banner that Crystal Rollins Jackson, our wonderful publications manager, designed, and we're always open to suggestions for better signage. There's this ongoing dialogue in the history of the archives of community church. What is community church? ? Damned Unitarians burned a question mark in my lawn, to quote a certain Utah Phillips. Maybe that should be what's on the front, a question mark. But we love it, and we embrace it, and we keep on striving for truth and social justice, and we are proudly a church that is engaged in the public debate and proud to host dissenting opinions. But I'll tell you that my main thought this morning is relief. I am relieved. Last night I drove the same route that Barry and Joanne drove this morning. It was up Route 3. Eric Kilburn and I had a gig in East Ham. They tell me I have to say Ham. East Ham, Massachusetts, First Encounter Coffee House. Lovely time we had there. On the drive home, it was torrential rain. All I was thinking about was the basement of our funky old humble building here, which in torrential rain floods, and there's usually 2 inches of water that needs to be mopped back down into the floor drains, and it's a problem that is very expensive to fix, and even the experts are not in agreement as to how to fix it. Whatever the fix is, it's going to cost a lot of money, but the reason I'm relieved is that the basement is dry. So I am very happy this morning to receive Barry and Joanne, and also to just come to know that Barry and Joanne have been longtime supporters and fans of many different songwriters and folk performers. including the amazing Katie Curtis, who organized a whole host of house concerts to benefit Americans United for Separation of Church and State, which Barry led for a bunch of years, and one of their fans, or one of the people that they're really interested in, just as I am big time, is named Tom Pacheco. This moment, we send out our good wishes to Tom, who's in a hospital in rehab, but has really strong optimism that he'll be able to be home. This is a magnificent songwriter and prolific writer and author, and I love his songs. And after the program today, I'm hoping to share a couple of the songs of his I've learned with Barry and Joanne. And another friend of Barry and Joanne's who is with us this morning. And this is another just goddess of mine in the pantheon of songwriters whose songs I am so in love with. Folks, will you welcome on our Zoom stage, I think from Harrisville, New Hampshire, if I'm not mistaken, Cozy Sheridan.
Thank you, Dean. I just want to say I turned on my original sound so that you can hear my guitar, but it may make some people's Zoom echo. So if you find that happening, just mute your own sound and the echo will go away. Thank you so much, Dean. I'm honored to be here. Sounds like you had a fun gig last night. So I'm starting with a song that I wrote because I was doing a show with Reggie Harris, who does a lot of songs of social justice, and I told him, you hold down the social justice part and I'll hold down the peace part. So I wrote this. This is called Here's the Rain. When you're really sad, you don't want to be cheered up. You want someone to sit down beside you here with your broken cup and all the happy draining away through the cracks of your very bad day. Here's the clouds and here's the rain. Here's the butterfly wing and then the hurricane. Here is all the pain. Here's the clouds. Here's the rain. And there's a lot going on, and I just don't know. So I stand out here and I sing happy songs in the road. It's a little Pollyanna, some might say. It won't make anybody's troubles go away. But here's the clouds, and here's the rain. Here's the butterfly wing, and then the hurricane. Here is all the pain. Here's the clouds, here's the rain. It's what I know how to do. Hope a better day will come and comfort you. Here's the clouds, here's the rain. Here's the butterfly wing, and then the hurricane. Here is all the pain. Here's the clouds, here's the rain. Here's the clouds, here's the rain. Thank you.
Thanks, Cozy. I want to just make some announcements. Some of them are from our newsletter, which is coming to a close. We're winding down our season, but we do have in our series 2 more events. That's Sunday morning events. Actually 3. One is Martin Schatz next Sunday, talking about keeping President Kennedy's struggle for world peace alive. Martin has been with us several times over quite a few years. It's been really a long time since he's been back, and it's just by coincidence. It's another just kind of convergence connection, which is that Martin's brother-in-law is my friend Eric Kilburn that I did a gig with last night, and owner of Wellspring Sound, magnificent songwriter himself. So that's Dr. Martin Schatz next Sunday. The Sunday after that is June 4th, and our speaker is named Ann Seba. Ann Seba wrote a biography of Ethel Rosenberg, The Short Life and Great Betrayal of an American Wife and Mother. And like I always do, and I don't mean to, I forgot to mention that with Martin Schatz is the duo Magpie will be joining us. And with Ann Seba is, we put Community Voices as a placeholder, which is our little choir here, but there's somebody else that I'm not remembering. The week after that is June 11th, which is a short program. It's a concert. Matt Callahan, who has been with us both by himself and with his wife, Yvonne Moore. They live in Switzerland, and they have done some magnificent programs here. One was a CD and book that Matt wrote about James Connolly, the Irish liberation fighter and Union songwriter, and another book about and CD about his growing up in the 60s in San Francisco. And this one, which is called Shake Off Your Chains, the story behind Songs of Slavery and Emancipation, which is the name of his CD. And these will be all songs from the 19th century, from the emancipation movement. And it should be a really interesting concert. That's going to be followed by our annual meeting, Community Church of Boston's annual meeting, where we look back at the year that has just passed and we take stock. And we have a yearbook that comes out and reports from the committees. And we also elect a new board. Are you interested in getting more involved in community church and being a part of the making of our future? Join. We have a membership book. All you need to do is sign up. In a year, you can even become a candidate for the board. Imagine that, and have a voice in our future. We have this building. We have this treasure of a building and this incredible headache of a building, both at the same time. And as a board, we struggle with all the things involved in that and how to do that. Another relief point, I mentioned earlier, my relief about no water in the basement. Relief is that we were now going to be doing a roofing project right over here, right around this skylight. Partly thanks to the City of Boston's Community Preservation Act, which gave us a grant to cover about 1/3 of the cost, a little bit over 1/3 of the cost. And it was going to happen now, but the permitting process went on and on and on. And there was the Landmarks Commission that had to sign off on it. And there was a zoning review. And by the time we got the permit, the HVAC contractor that it was going to disconnect and drain all of the AC units on the roof was not available and had booked other work. So that job has been postponed till September, which we call one of the shoulder months when we don't need AC and heat. It's the in-between months. And so that's when we're doing it, and we have a date certain. We have all the contractors lined up to be ready and willing for that date. So the relief is that we have a little bit of AC here in our auditorium, which it feels really good. That sun beats down through that skylight on a day like today, and a beautiful one it is after that torrential rain. I want to tell you about two other things coming up, a concert both physically and virtually on June 8th, 9th, 10th. Come on, it's the Friday. It's Dylan Buston, June 9th. June 9th, it's a Friday. And it's in the newsletter. And it's Dylan is a amazing songwriter, playwright, storyteller, raconteur, retired arts administrator, and he will be with us live physically. It should be a really wonderful event. He always has a lot of inspiration to share. This one is especially about Indiana, his birthplace, and his return to Indiana and his research into Indiana folklore. We also have a couple of things that are not mentioned in the newsletter. One is a peña. I don't know if you've ever heard of a peña, but it's a Latin American style open mic that was instituted, started in Chile by new songwriters like Victor Jara and Violeta Parra, where they would have these gatherings where they would have songs and poems and stories. And this is a Latin American style peña, which is sponsored by Encuentro Cinco, which is one of our in-house organizations that used to have their own space, but now we share space with them, and we share the beautiful treasure of the resource of their human capital members on our board. And it happens that two of them are from Latin America and drove this initiative about the Encuentro Cinco Peña. And that happens on June 10th, Saturday, June 10th. Now, here's one that's not on the schedule, the newsletter at all, because it's just being organized right now. And that is June 8th, which would be Thursday, June 8th. And the speaker is named Philip Weiss. Philip Weiss from the website and news information about Palestine, Mondo Weiss. Philip Weiss, I really follow that website very carefully. A lot of articles, both that he writes and that other journalists write for Mondo Weiss. And this is a physical event. He will be here, and we will host Philip, and good reason that we should tell you while we're talking about Palestine, that we have a table of beautiful handicrafts from Palestine that are here, compliments of Olive Branch Fair Trade on Martha's Vineyard. Linda Cohen, wonderful store, and she shares her crafts with us, and we proudly market those items for Linda Cohen. And that is Thursday, June 8th. So let me tell you about this marathon ending to our season. Thursday, June 8th, Philip Weiss, Mondo Weiss. Friday, June 9th, concert with Dylan Buston. Saturday, June 10th, Encuentro Cinco Peña. Sunday, June 11th, Matt Callahan, Songs of Emancipation from the 19th Century. And after that, our annual meeting. And after that, we go home and go to sleep. But we don't, because a new opportunity just arose for us to be part of a reception of a sailboat that's circumnavigating, that's called the Golden Rule. I don't know if you know about this, but it's hosted very much by American Friends Service Committee and by Veterans for Peace. And it will be in Boston, June 18th through June 22nd, something like that. And we will have some part in that reception of that sailboat. And it's all about striving for a world without nuclear weapons. So that's a lot of stuff coming on here. We also have, I shouldn't even say this, but there's a big announcement, and I'm not going to announce it, for the month of July. A large auditorium that's being booked for a speaker whose name we won't divulge, but just stay tuned. Keep your antenna up. And again, we have, for what we call our musical message, Cozy Sheridan. Thank you so much for gracing our meeting.
Thank you, Dean. I'm glad to be here. So my musical message, I loved what you were talking about, and my musical message is I think it's about kindness. I'm always looking for how can we be kind to each other. If there is nowhere else except this world, how can we be kind to the world, which I think Barry's going to talk about, and how we can be kind to each other. This is called My Fallen Comrade. It's quite new. And I also call it a relationship in 4 acts, and I saw that Barry's title was something in 3 acts. So here's a relationship in 4 acts. And talking about how easily it is to cause damage in the world and how hard it is not to. We all try so hard. And it starts when I hit a chipmunk as I'm driving home from the grocery store. I hit a chipmunk with my car, driving back from the store. I saw him change his mind, too late I swerved, and I swore, and when I looked into the rear view mirror, there was a little body in the road. The mistakes that we make, the animal we hit with our car, driving home, the concentration it takes to minimize the damage, crashing through the fragile unknown. You would have turned around and made sure he was out of pain. If you had to, you would have driven over him again. Years ago, we had somewhere to go, but you pulled over and you stopped and walked back to the center of the road, and you picked up the body of that squirrel and you carried him into the woods like a fallen comrade. The mistakes that we make, the animal we hit with our car, driving home, the concentration it takes to minimize the damage, crashing through the fragile unknown. And life is twisted in ways that we cannot see, and the animal that was hit one night, it was us. Your life with me, it was too late to stop. Now there's a body in the road, and there's you walking away. The mistakes that we make, the animal we hit with our car, driving home, the concentration it takes to minimize the damage, crashing through the fragile unknown. And you died in the spare room of another man's home, a long way from your family and in many ways alone. If I could, I would have carried you into the woods, my fallen comrade. The mistakes that we make, the animal we hit with our car, driving home, the concentration it takes to minimize the damage, crashing through the fragile unknown, crashing through the fragile unknown. So that's a brand new song, and it's got a message that I think is about how we are kind to each other, even as we make mistakes. That was about a relationship over a long time. And this next one is, I was thinking, well, I'm playing for a church, so I should talk about my thoughts on where we go after we die, which is in this song. This is a song I wrote after both my folks passed away. And they passed away in different circumstances. And I was really expecting that my mother would come back to visit me. And I didn't really know that I'd been expecting my mother to come back to visit me until she passed away and she didn't come back to visit me. But according to one of her neighbors, my mother was visiting her. And this was bothering me because I thought, well, if she's my mother, why is she visiting you? Why isn't she visiting me? And that's what sort of where this song started. I had to take that line out. I wrote this song many years ago, and it took me a while to finish it because I had to get rid of the line about how come she's not visiting me. So that's nowhere, not in the song anymore. They say in songwriting you have to kill your darlings. So I had to kill that darling. This is called Heaven Bound. Well, I expected that somehow we'd stay connected. I'd receive some sort of directive, that you would find a door in the wall, but it's been quiet, and I think by now you'd have tried it. Maybe it's time to decide it's that you're not gonna come at all, that we are here and then we're gone, on a one-way ticket, heaven bound. The ashes in the box, and the box is in the ground, and I don't know what I believe. Maybe we're here and then we leave, on a one-way ticket, heaven bound. And your neighbor next door, she asked for a statue of yours. I didn't know what she wanted it for, till she said you visit in the night, and that she's able to see you move things on a table. The statue was always unstable, it would never stand upright. We are here and then we are gone, on a one-way ticket, heaven bound. The ashes in a box, and the box is in the ground, and I don't know what I believe. Maybe we're here and then we leave, on a one-way ticket, heaven bound. And I arrived at the old man's bedside moments after he died. On a winter afternoon, he was freed from where he'd been trapped in that armchair. And as I sat there, I had a sense there was a happy light in the room, a sweetness breaking through on the way to a one-way ticket, heaven bound. The ashes in the box, and the box is in the ground. I don't know what I believe. Maybe we're here and then we leave, but I think he said hello before goodbye. But you were in a hurry, 'cause your body was in pain, and who knows what you had to do to get on that train for the one-way ticket, heaven bound. The ashes in the box, and the box is in the ground, and I don't know what I believe. Maybe we're here and then we leave, on a one-way ticket, heaven bound. A one-way ticket, heaven bound. Thank you.
Oh yeah, Cozy. Love it. Love it. Love having you.
Thank you.
By way of introduction of our speaker this morning, I have a song that was lost for about 10 years, and I just found it again while poking around the archives that are on our 5th floor. And by the way, I'll mention that any Wednesday at noon, when you're nearby, come. We have an open house. We serve pupusas. Luis Guzman, our cook, is from El Salvador and brings pupusas from Chelsea. And we serve them on Wednesday in an open house, and we're glad to give you a tour of all floors of what we have here. The 5th floor is all community church archives, letters from Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy. Fourth floor is called the History Project. And if they're in, they will give us a tour of what they are, which is preserving, archiving, and elevating Boston's LGBT history and culture. The third floor is our Sacco and Vanzetti collection, which we inherited from the late Bob Datilio, and its primary source materials about the Sacco and Vanzetti case and about early 20th century Italian anarchism. It's really interesting. You could meet Jerry Kaplan, who is our curator of that collection, which eventually will go in large part to the Boston Public Library, but it's for now being housed in our third floor space, and of course our second floor auditorium that has tons of books, mountains of books that we inherited from Bob as well. But that's another part of what we'd love to have you come and just visit the church on a Wednesday at noon. So this is a song that I sing now because it's in a category of songs that I will say that are called from my repertoire, songs I will never sing for my mother. And the reason is because of their irreverence and her reverence to her evangelical Christianity, which I respect and elevate. You know, she's 96 and I'm going to see her this afternoon, and so I'll get this song out of the way before I see her. And at Community Church, we elevate irreverence and heresy and a few other things like that. I was having this thought that we officially elevate April 1st, April Fool's Day, to be our high holiday. But nobody has taken that very seriously, which is just as well, you know, because of whatever. Anyway, this is a song that if you're a Christian or you have some Christianity in your background, you will recognize. And past the first line, it goes astray. What a friend we have in Jesus. What a friend in Socrates. What a friend we have in Buddha. To the kingdom we have keys. We believe in many saviors. We believe in many seers, souls whose universal gospel speaks to us across the years. What a friend we have in Moses. What a friend in Esther too. We have Lao Tse and Confucius, and a prophet lives in you. When you're weak and heavy laden, cumbered with a load of care, think of friends throughout the ages, every when and everywhere. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. You saints are everywhere. Souls like President John Adams, souls like Olympia Brown. Oh, what friends we have to guide us. Oh, what sages we have found. What a friend in Charles Darwin. What a friend in Susan B. What a friend in Clara Barton. They all help to make us free. What a friend in P.T. Barnum. What a friend in Jefferson. We've 400 years of friendship, and we know there's more to come. That's my introduction to Reverend Barry Lynn. That's probably a different introduction than you ever had, Barry. We are so glad that you are physically here with us and that you are You and Joanne are now officially retired in the state of Massachusetts and are nearby, and I hope you will be here often in the years to come. Folks, Reverend Barry Lynn.
I was speaking in California one night and at a United Church of Christ, and I never met the woman who was the minister there. She had found to report on who I was every negative thing said about me on the internet, and so she described me with those inglorious words. So, but this is really close to just as good as that introduction. It's nice to be here. The last time I was here was virtually right before the 500+ day COVID lockdown. During that pandemic, we lived in Washington, D.C. I did a couple of things. I took 6 virtual guitar lessons from a songwriter in Maine. I walked a couple of miles in the woods not too far from our house every day. And I wrote a memoir in 3 volumes. The volumes are called, and there's a picture behind me, Paid to Piss People Off. This is because a high school student came up to me once at a party. Mr. Lynn, I want to do what you do when I get out of school. He was then in high school. I said, what do you think I do? He said, I think you get paid to piss people off. I said, there's a little more to it, but that's a good start. And that title has gotten me in some real trouble again. I attempted to purchase I think, $20 advertisement on Twitter about this book. And of course, Twitter is now owned by Elon Musk, a man who claims to be a great First Amendment advocate. They rejected the ad because they said it contained inappropriate content. And if you go back to the 1970s, you remember that there was a wonderful comedian named George Carlin who did a stand-up routine called The 7 Dirty Words, of which piss happened to be one of them. So now here is Elon Musk, who thinks nothing of having neo-Nazis and racists on his platform, all upset, highly offended by the use of a euphemism for urination. Just go figure that. Today, I'd like to take a look at some of my activities and a couple of the lessons I've learned along the way. It's the first time I've tried to summarize these 650 pages or so into a 45-minute address. It's undoubtedly true that we are in part the product of our DNA, that we owe those who gave us the DNA a lot of credit. But I happen to think that the most credit for any of our lives goes to the people we have communicated with, the people whose lives we've touched and who have touched our lives. That's what really shapes a lifetime. And one of the things I want to do right away is thank Cozy Sheridan for these wonderful songs. I had not seen her live until just a few weeks ago. Ironically, synchronicity-wise, I had never seen her. But if you can show a slide here as, yes, we're going to have a slide. Dean had alluded to this program we did for a number of years called Voices United for Separation of Church and State. I was with the organization Americans United for Separation of Church and State for a very long time, 25 years. And these are some of the people that also performed. Cozy did a show, I believe, out in Utah. And these are some of the other folks, Katie Curtis, who was mentioned, John Gorka, Lewis Black, and others who were kind enough to devote their time to that program. If you turn to the next little picture here, that's me. I think I was in the 5th grade when that photograph was taken. I was a very shy little boy. I was very scared. I was scared about almost everything. But by the time I reached high school, a couple of things had happened that made me terribly interested in politics and very eager to communicate my political views with anybody who would listen. And it really did change my life. The kind of a cute kid, wasn't I? What changed my life the most was Vietnam. My parents took me to Ocean City, New Jersey every summer for 1 week. We stayed at the same hotel, the Hotel Lincoln. We had lunch at the same restaurant, the Chatterbox, and had milkshakes and grilled cheese sandwich. And at night, every night, I had roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and corn. It was a very patterned life. And every week, one night at the Hotel Lincoln, they would have an activities night, and they would often show a movie. And in 1962, they showed a movie called China Gate. It had been made a few years earlier, and it starred Angie Dickinson, Gene Barry, and Nat King Cole, the well-known singer. It was about the French involvement in Indochina, and it was mildly anti-French. It was not even shown in France for many, many years. I was fascinated. I had never heard of Vietnam. I had no idea there had been a war there, and little did I know that engagement by the United States was going to get much, much greater there. It was exactly 1 year later that I found myself in the same activities room at the same hotel, watching the debate in early August over the so-called Gulf of Tonkin resolution. This, of course, was the claim made by Lyndon Johnson, since debunked, that the United States had 2 ships attacked by North Vietnamese military vehicles. It was dramatic. There was a lot of rhetoric, a lot of warlike sentiments expressed. And that night, only 2 members of the United States Senate expressed any doubts. And they gave to Lyndon Johnson this extraordinarily broad power to take any steps necessary to take care of stopping communist aggression in Vietnam. Only Ernest Greening of Alaska and Wayne Morse of Oregon said no to that. It passed otherwise. And I remember talking to my father. I said, I don't know what this war is, but it sounds like it's going to get very big. And he said, don't worry, Barry, it'll be over very soon. It was 11 years before that war was in any way over. I was so interested, though. By that time, I was starting to develop an interest in history and modern history. And there was a gentleman named Bob Scheer. I don't know if he's ever spoken here, but a journalist who started Ramparts magazine back in the 60s. And you'll hear a little bit more about him in a minute. But his writing was so clear that it just compelled me to understand that the war in Vietnam was not a war in which the United States should be devoting treasure or the lives of anyone here or there. I went on to, in high school, I objected to marching in a Victory in Vietnam parade with the local high school marching band. It was the one thing I could do. There was nobody in the school that was terribly interested in opposing the war. I seemed to be a lone voice whenever I'd bring it up, but I did bring it up frequently in classes, whether it was appropriate or not. I went on to college at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I did the things that young activists normally do. They go to local and to national demonstrations, in this case, demonstrations not only in Carlisle and throughout Pennsylvania, but in Washington and New York as well. As freshmen, there were 4 of us who loaded into somebody's car, drove to Washington for a big demonstration in the fall of 1967. We returned later that night and found out that there were 4 other people at Dickinson who had also been there. So there were 8 people on that first effort to say no to Vietnam. 8 people wasn't much, but it was a start. If you fast forward a few years until the time after the murders at Jackson State and Kent State, I volunteered to find a way to get a number of buses, 8 buses of students to go to the big Washington mobilization at that time. I couldn't find any place that would take us there, no bus line, until I came across the bus company that provided the Gettysburg Battlefield Tour buses. And they said, we'd be happy to do that. And they did, and 8 bus loads. It was a photographic miracle. It showed up and everybody pulled out their cameras, because to see in the middle of an anti-war demonstration, 8 buses that said Battlefield Tours was about as beautiful as you could come up. So 8 bus loads from 8 people, we were making a little bit of progress. But as the war was coming to an end, let me just grab a little coffee. And so college is ending, and I had some real questions. I knew that I was getting married in just a week after graduation. I knew that quite appropriately they had done away with married persons' exemptions to the draft. I wanted to get a professional degree, but I had abandoned interest in the law because the entire legal profession seemed to think there was nothing wrong with the war in Vietnam, with the occasional outlying groups like the National Lawyers Guild. I thought about going to seminary. After all, Dr. Martin Luther King was one of the great leaders of the opposition to the war in Vietnam. He was one of the most articulate voices. He even spoke outside the United Nations in 1967 to link the war to racial equality throughout America. And the Reverend William Sloane Coffin had become a United Church of Christ minister and also was an articulate voice against that war when he and Dr. Benjamin Spock traveled the country to talk about opposition to the war. So I was intrigued by the military, or by the ministry, but I was troubled by something else. You could still get a ministerial deferment in 1970, but I found that grossly unfair. Why keep preachers out of the military while men in every other profession had to go and fight it? Even the route of finding a conscientious objector status was very difficult, impossible for most people. The Selective Service then, as now, does not recognize the thing that is the preeminent ideology that religious groups look at in screening whether a war is a good one or an evil one. It's the just war theory. It's the heart of Roman Catholic opposition to the war. And even Pete Seeger, much as we all view him as a pacifist, he would say in the middle of the Vietnam War, if this was a war where my country was being threatened, I'd be in the front lines. I was scheduled to take my Army physical one Monday. I couldn't sleep the night before because I kept throwing things against the wall. My anger at this whole idea that any government could tell people who didn't even know who the so-called enemy was, that they were going to be asked to go and kill them, whether they liked it or not. I was very hostile that day. I wore a red dye-drenched armband as if it was blood on my left arm. I argued with the sergeant giving the introductory questionnaire. I said, won't sign some of this. I won't agree to it because of the 9th Amendment to the Constitution. I had no idea what that was. I didn't think he did either. So we got through that. And then they sent me to the physicals, and I went to the physical exam room. Doctor in charge of the place listened to my chest and said, "Are you aware that you have a very serious heart condition?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, you're going to be 4F. You will never be drafted." And I said, "Well, what do I do about this new ailment that I didn't know I had. And he said, there's nothing to do, just watch it. Which didn't, I didn't think much about it. I just thought, well, I don't have to go to Vietnam now. That's good. I thought if there was nothing to do about it, I should, in fact, just watch what was going on with my heart. And I did, and I watched it for a very long time. When I moved to Boston, I got involved in a lot of issues that were more local in Vietnam. Tried to get the city to remove lead paint from apartment walls when it peeled off so that small children would ingest the lead paint. It would cause serious brain damage. And it still is in inner cities all over the United States. And the other thing I started to do was to teach at the Cardinal Cushing Central High School for Girls in South Boston. This was one of the 2 schools in Boston that had made the judgment at the highest levels, the Archdiocese of Boston, that those schools, one in the South End and one in South Boston, would not become the havens for white flight of parents who were wanting to send their children somewhere else when integration came to Boston itself and to its public schools. It was a mighty place. It was a very progressive place run by the Order of the Sisters of Notre Dame. You might say, well, how progressive was it? One day I got a note left for me in the faculty mailbox from the principal of the place. She said she wanted to see me. I went down to her office and I asked, here I am, what do you want to talk about? And she said, are you having people from Planned Parenthood coming into your class? And I said, yes, because I tend to tell the truth. And I expected the next words I would hear would be, your services then are no longer required. Instead, she said, well, that's good. Our girls need to learn that stuff somewhere. Having met a lot of those girls' boyfriends, I think it's safe to say those guys could have used knowing about that stuff as well. What a place. In the summer of 1974, I served a small church in New Hampshire. I prepared my sermons most weeks while watching the Watergate hearings on television. Nixon was clearly going to be gone, but what about the war, the damn war? It was still going on. It was spreading. It had spread to Indonesia. It had spread to Cambodia already. Then I heard about a job in Washington, D.C. at the United Church of Christ lobbying office, a paid internship to deal directly with getting assistance to Vietnam War resistors in and out of the military. I called the minister whose name was on that job announcement, Paul Kitloss. I called him. I told him I would be in D.C. the next week. I'd love to see him. He said that would probably be a waste of time because he already had a candidate for this job. And he also had to catch an airplane flight that morning. I was a little aggressive. I said, how about 15 minutes? And he somewhat reluctantly agreed. I got there early. And I saw that he had a poster behind his desk with a painting by Sister Carita with the words, if Jesus comes again, he had better show up as a loaf of bread, my kind of minister. He worked out a way, as we talked for over an hour, to find a job for both of us and thus help to create me as an activist who could even be paid to do it. We moved to Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1976, the year in which President Nixon had to resign and was replaced by Gerald Ford, who pardoned Richard Nixon. And this was the basis for a request to Ford by Jane Hart, avid anti-war activist and the widow of Michigan Senator Phil Hart, who had just died that December. Ford called Mrs. Hart a few days after Phil's death to say, is there anything that I can do for you? And Jane said without hesitation, yes, you can grant an amnesty to all those who resisted the war in Vietnam. That was headline news for days and days. Gerald Ford said he would consider it, but he was also in the process of trying to start kind of an uptick in what he called the earned reentry program, which permitted certain people who had resisted the war a kind of Rube Goldberg-esque system, actually apply for relief, spend 2 years of public service to earn their way back into the status of being good Americans. One of my mentors during that time was an ACLU non-lawyer named Henry Schwarzschild. He taught me a lot of lessons, including never think that any issue worth considering for more than a minute is a purely legal one. Every important issue is ultimately a moral question. And he was adept at using the system to help the system destroy itself. That flailing earned reentry program was going to get a boost when the network covering the Super Bowl that year had agreed to give it 1 free minute of publicity. Free minute, even in those days, was worth north of $1 million. Henry called, talked to the CBS lawyers, said, you know, it's going to get a lot of complaints from local stations because everybody's going to say, this is so controversial. We demand to have our side covered because there was at the time something called the Fairness Doctrine. And it's debatable how significant it was, but it scared the heck out of the CBS lawyers, and they pulled the commercial. And Henry wanted that to happen. We all wanted that to happen. And it was a good slap in the face at a miserable government system using the rules that the government itself had set up to do this damage. The amnesty movement had a lot of players with a lot of different agendas, proposed solutions. It was my very first experience with the machinations of coalition politics and the collateral need to balance all of those interests, because you cannot ever achieve anything good by yourself. You always need people behind you, and you can never forget the people behind you. Some folks were somewhat skeptical of the work that Henry Schwarzschild and I were doing, a lot of it in DC, but we did get Senator Edward Kennedy interested in the issue so much that he successfully got the Justice Department to come up with a complete and final list of all the persons currently under indictment or investigation for draft law violations. If you take a picture here. There's probably one back. So Ted got this out. There were hundreds of thousands of people during Vietnam who believed that they were about to be investigated and possibly indicted for draft refusal. He insisted the Justice Department come up with a final list so that if you were on the list, you knew you were in trouble. If you weren't on the list, you knew you were not in trouble. You're off the prosecutorial hook. So he gave his list to 4 or 5 groups around the country, and we could take calls for weeks telling people yes or no, they're in legal trouble or they're not. The board program, the case-by-case review, was a huge failure, but it also posited the difficulty. How could we get people to remember, as the 70s were getting deeper and deeper, that there had been a war in Vietnam? What were we going to do? How was anybody ever going to grant some relief to people that had still resisted the war? The answer was 1976 Democratic National Convention. We knew we had to do something dramatic, and we did. And if you get to the next picture, we'll talk a little about that. This was as a man in England, had left the country, went to England for 5 or 6 years, named Fritz Efaw. He's a person on the left. One of the things we did at the 1968 convention was to make sure that this would happen. This was one day before the actual nomination of Jimmy Carter. The person next to him is Ron Kovic, the author of the book Born on the 4th of July. And Ron and a marvelous woman named Louise Ransom whose son had been killed in Vietnam on Mother's Day in 1968, nominated and then seconded Fritz Efaw for Vice President of the United States. That picture, so iconic, it was on the front page of almost every newspaper in America. And Ron welcomed Fritz back. And we use that as a good publicity vehicle. If you don't know Ron, or you don't know Born on the 4th of July, there was a somewhat imperfect, but nevertheless powerful movie made of Born on the 4th of July with Tom Cruise playing Ron Kovic. Carter did go on, grant a pardon. It was flawed. It did not reach everyone, but at least it was an indicator that Jimmy Carter had the sense to understand you should put the war in part behind us, and he did just that. But he didn't learn too much, I'm afraid. Jimmy Carter flip-flopped on the question of whether to bring back selective service. At first, he was against it, 1979. Then in 1980, during the campaign for the presidency, he decided to reinstate draft registration. He kept saying, well, we're not going to draft anyone necessarily, but we want to get everybody's name down. And of course, we should include women in the draft, which he knew would never happen. He enlisted a good friend of mine who just died, Congresswoman Pat Schroeder from Colorado, to try to get her to work with getting women included in draft registration, knowing, of course, full well that, bright as she was, she would not do that. And as she told him once, I'm here to bring peace. I am not here to get more people into the war machine. Ronald Reagan at the time was against registering people for the draft. He thought that was just the beginnings of an effort to revitalize selective service. And he was against it, but he was talked out of it as well. And in fact, there were bold efforts made, statements made by people in his Justice Department, including the Attorney General at the time, Ed Meese, and a man named Rudy Giuliani, you may have heard of him, who was in the Justice Department leading the charge for prosecuting people for draft non-compliance. When all was said and done, there were only 19 people ever prosecuted for failing to register in this new draft registration rubric, which goes on to this day. If you just get another picture up here. Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of speaking at protest rallies. This was, again, right before the final vote on holding peacetime registration, and did a lot of press conference with a few of the people who had resisted. I don't know, I think there's another picture here. Maybe not. It's kind of, yeah, this is one of the 18 people, one of the 19 people, 18 of them are actually written to the Justice Department, informing them that they would not be registering. One of them was a Laotian refugee who possibly didn't even understand that they had an obligation to register. No one else, 19 people out of hundreds of thousands of people who had refused to register for the draft. I think conscription is going to never come back in this country, because once you have an amnesty followed by a failure to prosecute many people, almost no one, you don't have a strong support for returning conscription to the United States. I worked a lot with the ACLU during those days, and when one of my frequent colleagues there decided to run for office for Congress, he was going to leave the ACLU. I applied for his position. I did get that position. And this is what forms a lot of my book, Porn. I get too excited. It's not all about porn. But when I started at the ACLU, it was just the beginning of the effort by Ronald Reagan to amend the Constitution to include a constitutional right to pray in public schools, not individually, but for governments to write the prayers or select the prayers and have everyone pray them. I was dispatched out into what's called the swamp, is kind of area outside of the Capitol. It was raining that day. I was in rain gear, umbrellas. It was raining so much, it literally was a swamp by that time. And as I was doing a live interview with CNN, I could just think there are people watching this that going, look at that jerk from the ACLU. He doesn't even know to come in out of the rain. But I gave up. I kept going. This was a time when it was very difficult to, now it's difficult to find any Republicans who frankly believe anything that's not told them by the craziest people in their party. But at that time, there were genuine moderate Republicans like Senator Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania. He went to the White House to personally explain to Reagan how miserably he had been treated as the only Jew in the Nebraska high school he attended growing up. Even Barry Goldwater, Mr. Conservative, told the president that there were so many different religions in Arizona, it would be impossible to find a single prayer that everyone could agree to pray. And with a footnote, he said there's so many native tribes in, excuse me, in the state, you couldn't even find a single prayer that native people would agree to. So it was important to do that, and it was defeated. Didn't even come close to getting the 2/3 of a vote necessary to move it on to the House and then to the states for ratification. Shortly thereafter, they came up with another idea. The idea was to open. Do apologize for this. I've had laryngitis most of the week, and I think I'm getting a little of it back, but I apologize for that. I'm going to drink a little coffee. So somebody, including Jerry Falwell, dreamed up another idea. He said, well, we didn't get school prayer amendment, but we can have a bill passed. We'll call it the Equal Access Act. This will give Christian students, any religious students, the right to organize in their own high schools for any religious purpose. And he claimed that everybody else, every secular reason you wanted to have a club, you could have it, but if you were a Christian club, you were having troubles. Mark Hatfield, who was a great peace advocate throughout his life, was one of the people who I worked with very closely on stopping the draft and pro-amnesty. But I couldn't agree with him on this one. This created the fiction that all these other school clubs were getting together, meeting out there, having sex parties. I don't know what he thought they were having, but the Christian kids could not have a Bible study. There was a wonderful senator from the state of Connecticut at the time named Lowell Weicker. Lowell Weicker was a Republican when he was in the Senate, later ran as an independent for governor, won independent governor of Connecticut, and then actually ran for president for a while. And he thought this was a terrible idea. He came up to me numerous occasions, Barry, what are we going to do about this? And he was a brilliant user of the filibuster, which now has no purpose. I mean, it is a terrible, terrible tool. But at the time, people like Lowell Weicker used it and scared living, I wouldn't even say bejesus, the living bejesus out of other senators, because when he said, I'm going to stop something, he meant that he was going to use every method in his power, every technique that he could use to filibuster bad pieces of legislation that would violate the First Amendment of the United States. And I told him, Senator, you're really good at this, but this has got so much momentum behind it. Maybe it's not going to work this time. And he said, well, here's what we're going to do. Where's the book? What happened to my books? Where are they? Oh, right here. I said, yeah, here's what the book says. I was in Lowell Weiker's office meeting with his chief of staff that afternoon when the senator walked in and said, let's negotiate. We are meeting with Mark Hatfield in just a few minutes. So we met, Hatfield, Weiker, the two staff members from their offices, and me, and we negotiated. Weiker asked Hatfield why it was so important to protect only religious student group meetings, not all student meetings. Hatfield said, I like the First Amendment. I have no problem with more inclusive language. And I floated some wording that I had discussed with one of the preeminent outside supporters, that if the school had created a limited public forum at which student groups could meet, all student speech at those meetings that had, quote, religious, political, philosophical, or other content would be protected. And pretty much covered everything. Hatfield agreed. He agreed some other changes, like no school officials could attend these meetings unless it was necessary for insurance purposes, and smaller unpopular groups could not be prohibited. No control would come from outside figures. All these monumental achievements. The next day, Weiker's staff person called me and said, so if you ever are trying to avoid being executed, who do you want to defend you, Weiker or Hatfield? That law became the basis for dramatic increases in gay straight student alliances throughout the United States. And to its credit, rare credit for the religious right, in general, they said, well, that's what happens. We got what we wanted, but everybody else did also. It's a lesson I learned. That one of the lessons is occasionally in Washington and in local politics, you can actually form creative compromises. The average compromise done in Congress, and we're going to see more in the next few weeks, instead of fixing something, you postpone it for a couple of weeks or months or years and study it, or you just kind of, if it's a money matter, you just split it down the middle and give nobody everything they want, and probably don't give them anything that's enough to actually do the job. But this was creative, and I think it did a lot of good for students' free speech rights in the future. So that was that. But the book has this picture of Ed Meese. I told you we'd get back to him. He was the Attorney General during much of the Reagan years. And he decided they were going to create a commission on pornography. Now, the president announced this in the Congressional Record one day. He was here to study the, quote, serious national problem of pornography. It was set up in the Justice Department, consisted of 11 people, including its chair, Henry Hudson, local prosecutor in Arlington, Virginia, who had been so tough on any sexual materials that you couldn't even buy a copy of Playboy in the entire county. Yeah, they were. 7 of the members were men, 4 were women. Little was known of the 3 women, but the 4th was the vice mayor of Scottsdale, Arizona, known for urging residents to go to the parking lot of the local adult movie theater photograph the license plates of people inside, find out who were the people that had those plates, and then publicize who these people were in order to shame them. The men included James Dobson, a right-wing Christian psychologist, founder of the Family Research Council, now labeled a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center because of its deep homophobia. Mark Dietz, a psychiatrist who believed that not only was porn dangerous, but that the lurid covers of detective magazines also should be barred. Law professor Frederick Schauer, who thought pornography should be given no First Amendment protection because it was not speech. It was more akin to visiting a hooker or using a dildo. This is possibly the only sermon I've ever given using the word dildo, but it was what he said. It also contained Father Bruce Ritter, the founder of Covenant House in New York City, who helped runaway children, and a man whom I actually respected and even supported financially before he joined the commission. But then several journalists working on following the commission found out that he had actually hired some young men, not children, to stay with him in his hotel room during some of the commission meetings. The Archdiocese of New York later removed him from his position and sent him to India to complete his ministry. I told the New York Times the day that this commission was announced that I believed, quote, a train marked censorship has just left the station. I think it was actually the quote of the day in the New York Times. I had persuaded the American Civil Liberties Union that I should be a kind of constitutional stalker, follow it around the country. Then remember what my early mentor, Henry Schwarzschild, taught me. He said, use the power of government and the rules of government to help destroy it. This commission operated as a federal advisory committee. It had a lot of rules. The one that I liked the most, required that at the same time documents were sent to the members, they must be made available to the public. Whenever the meetings were getting close, I would call the commission office, find out exactly when documents were to be sent, so I could walk a couple of blocks and pick up copies myself. Then I would find the weirdest things that they were considering doing, call the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times, whose reporter was none other than Bob Scheer, the guy who started Ramparts. And I'd tell them all about it, and that was my side of the story. But the chairman of the commission had also gotten its members to make another agreement outside of the rules themselves. They would make no comments about their workings until the final report was issued. So all these articles, month after month, would report Lynn of the ACLU said thus and so, and then the commission would be asked and they would have no comment. So I got all of the press, and that's a pretty good position to be in if you're in the business of trying to take down a government agency. I think we got another picture here, maybe. Not sure what this is. Oh, yeah. Yeah, another weird thing that was happening before I get to an even weirder thing, but at the time that the commission was around, there were a lot of people in the adult industry with my same last name, Lynn. This is Ginger Lynn. There were a number of other Lynns. There was even a woman named Portia Lynn. And I had to actually, I spoke at a convention, I think the convention where Ginger Lynn was appearing, and I had to tell all the people in the porn industry that I was in no way related to any of their superstar actresses. Many, many years later, I met Ginger Lynn at another kind of event, and she autographed a picture I could take home to Joanne that said, "I am not related in any way to your husband." She's very courageous in some other ways that we talk about in the book. Anyway, the thing about this, you can never, there's a caveat to this, because I don't imagine how you talk as an activist about guns. But anything else, you cannot lose your sense of humor. You absolutely cannot. The Meese Commission decided they were going to go on a sojourn to Houston, Texas, adult bookstores. And they published that in the Federal Register. And there's a wonderful feminist writer on sex panics named Carol Vance. So she and I got the 2 slots on the bus that would take us with the commissioners to all of these dirty bookstores. And these stores were really sleazy places. One had water from a leaking pipe running over the floor. They could in no way be mistaken for the adult stores now found in many suburban shopping centers. The third store was where my single greatest moment of enjoyment shadowing the commission occurred. I found myself in a buddy booth where 2 or 3 people could watch a loop of 8mm film and perhaps act on their reactions. I found myself in the booth with Chairman Henry Hudson and the editor of Woman's Day magazine, Ellen Levine. We were observing a film in which 2 gay men wearing green rubber monster masks were having a sexual encounter. Hudson said, "So Barry, when you testified before the commission, you said all these films have meanings. So what's the meaning of this?" When I responded, "Try it, you might like it," Miss Levine, already sour on being a part of the commission, could barely contain her laughter. Yes, that's why you cannot lose your sense of humor. There was something going on at the same time. I talk about it in the book a lot. It was a feminist-based critique of pornography. They wanted to treat it not as a crime, but as a violation of the civil rights of women. And again, I'm sorry about this, but the commission never understood it. Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon had developed a rubric in which to deal with this, but they testified, and then the commission was completely wrong-headed about it. They didn't care about it, didn't understand it. But I thought they had made some good points, and I actually tried to get the ACLU to change its policies in some way, creating a right of action for sexual privacy violations. It was not successful, but my work to undermine the commission was quite successful. Oh, thank you. This will heal me up. So the commission, it's not just because the press thought it was good and I got a bunch of awards, free speech awards, but James Dobson himself came up to me in a restaurant and said, "You know, Barry, I hate everything you stand for, but I admit that you destroyed every good thing we tried to do." Yeah, that was good. That was good. Yeah, I liked it. I think I said something like, "Oh, you tried to do something good." You know what I discovered? The feminist criticism aside, which has lots of problems, and as I said, there's a long section in this book about it. But what conservatives don't like about pornography is not the pictures. They hate the fact that if you have 2 men engaged in sex, 2 men should not have sex in the first place. They don't just hate the picture, they hate the people behind it. They hate the people who are acting in these productions. And they don't want to admit it, most of them, but that's really what it's all about for them. All about. So it was successful in, making the commission seem foolish. This picture on the cover, I think there's a picture, that was another picture on the front page of every newspaper in the country. There's a picture of Ed Meese underneath the goddess of justice. Not necessarily proud of this, but every time I would show this picture, I would refer to it as the 2 boobs photograph. And yeah, you can see the nipple. And Anyway, but this made me the go-to guy on opposition to anything else. I had a lot of fun with most of these issues, including their effort to regulate rock and rap music, and that culminated in a Senate committee hearing on the dangers of rock music, and featured people like Frank Zappa and, hold your breath, John Denver. Yeah, people here going like, what? He's a pure person. And John, he had to admit that he said that some people thought his song Rocky Mountain High was a pro-drug song. At about that point, Senator Al Gore, who was on the committee, interrupted Denver and said, well, John, some of your songs seem to glorify suicide. And John Denver, who had met a couple times, he gave literally the best response I have ever heard from the mouth of anyone at a congressional hearing. He says to Gore, if I could only count the number of times that a child came up to me and said, if I don't get your autograph, my mother is going to kill me. And I thought, yep. Every cry of the censor, every cry, whether it's then or now, and we're seeing or hearing it with TikTok also. Let's protect the children. And if we reduce the entire population to seeing or hearing only that which is suitable for children, then we're going to live in a pretty sad country. The biggest challenge to me was when there's an effort to stop something, the advertising of some product I genuinely detest. Let's talk tobacco. I find smoking utterly disgusting. I apologize to smokers. I'd be happy to see the federal government simply bar the sales of tobacco products. That is never going to happen. And the fallback position cannot be, well, let's ban the advertising of tobacco products, or let's tell the tobacco industry can only advertise without using any pictures. All of these are proposals that came up and were defeated in Congress. This whole First Amendment works the best if it works seamlessly. It works for everybody. And I think my favorite illustration of this was when I was asked to speak to the annual convention of the Kentucky Tobacco Farmers Association. I was introduced. I went up to the podium. I said I was there to discuss censorship. I held up a copy of Playboy magazine. Now, this place had a lot of spouses, children of the farmers in attendance, and there were audible gasps when I said, look at this, and opened the magazine, not to the centerfold, but to a tobacco company ad featuring the big snouted Joe Camel figure, cartoon figure, advertising Camel cigarettes. It was a cardboard 3D cutout. You opened it and it popped out. The tobacco farmers, I'm sure on behalf of their children and spouses, breathed a sigh of relief. But the point is, if you're worried about it, if you want to protect your right to publicize something that is legal, then you kind of can't get too bent out of shape if it turns out that somebody else has a different image that they want to promote. That was kind of Act 1 and 2. Let me just briefly talk about Act 3 at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I did get a call one morning when we had moved briefly to New Hampshire to work on, well, there are people who live in New Hampshire now. I don't want to say too many bad things about it, but I was supposed to help teach doctors how to communicate. It took me about 2 weeks to figure out most doctors do not want to communicate. They want to spend their time doing research. And but anyway, I got a call that said that they were looking for a new director at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. And person calling said, I heard over the grapevine you're not happy where you are. Would you like to be interviewed? So I was, and I did in fact, get the job. I had worked with Americans United for Separation of Church and State during much of the time I was with the ACLU. Every time I'd run into the former president of now, Gloria Steinem, she'd say, "I love the name of your organization because it says exactly what you stand for." I like that. There are issues like government-sponsored prayer, giving government funds to religious schools, removing creches from public spots. But I thought it was important to take on more than that. These were the issues that were affecting the public. They still affect the public, and they're almost entirely, if you're on the what I call the wrong side of it, you are on the wrong side of it because of your theological beliefs. Those decisions about moving aggressively into the LGBTQ world and also into the world of reproductive justice meant that I was going to get a lot of criticism from every power broker of the religious right almost from the day I started in the job. And that certainly was the case. The first day on the job there, my wife was reading USA Today. She looked at the back page. She said, "Is this legal?" And this was a full-page advertisement taken out in USA Today by one Randall Terry, who, of course, was a prominent anti-abortion activist. And it said, "Christian beware." And then it had proof text from the Bible of all the allegedly sinful comments that President Clinton, then running for the presidency, had made. At the bottom, it said, "And if you vote for a sinner, you are a sinner also." And there was another proof text from the Bible right following that. So I called my brilliant staff of people in the communications world down there. They said, "Oh, we want to do something. Glad you want to do this." We sent out a press release, got a huge amount of attention for it. And the church at Pierce Creek, which is where Randall Terry was visiting, or he was a member at the time. Just an aside, he was thrown out of the church when he apparently ran away with the choir director. But that's, his business, I guess. So anyway, we put it out and they sued. They lost in the trial court. They lost in the appeals court of the District of Columbia, and then decided they wouldn't go to the Supreme Court because they were afraid they'd lose there, that there was no special First Amendment right for churches to do what no other charity can do, and that is endorse or oppose candidates for public office. Wright kept claiming if you enforce that provision, you would have silenced the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King many years later at a congressional hearing on this very subject. They made the same claim, about Dr. King's made by one of the witnesses, and none other than the great Congressman John Lewis, who worked with King, said that King had never, ever used the facilities of a religious institution to endorse or oppose anyone. That dramatically shut up that part of the argument. These are the kinds of issues we moved into, taking it seriously. I wish that even the current administration would take a little bit more seriously what it is when they violate the tax laws by endorsing candidates for public office. This is not difficult. This is not a hugely difficult line. When you take out an ad, when you put on your, well, you don't have one here, but if you had a giant sign outside and you put down, "Vote for so-and-so," kind of you're on the side of somebody, and that is illegal to do. I'm proud of what he did at Americans United. I retired a few years ago. We stopped an Iowa prison from giving the best cells and other perks to inmates that were willing to participate in Chuck Colson. Remember him? Prison fellowship program. We stopped the teaching of so-called intelligent design as an alternative to evolution in Pennsylvania public schools. We prevented the erection of a 2.5-ton monument of the Ten Commandments in the Alabama Courts building. And we won the rights of Wiccans and pagans to have the pentacle added as an emblem of honor in VA cemeteries, in spite of President Bush's insistence that that not be allowed. And we supported the effort to achieve marriage equality. I had a lot of disputes with Jerry Falwell, Phyllis Schlafly, everybody in the religious right. And much as I detested their ideas and their arrogance and their positions on issues, I tried, and I still try, not to hate them personally. Hate of people just does something to the hater. It grows like a malignancy. It gets in the way of ever trying to forge one of those creative compromises, or even trying to figure out how that other person is truly motivated. You want to show the last picture? I think it's just the last picture here. That was a Wiccan. That is the first Wiccan Christians monument at Arlington National Cemetery. I did it with a marvelous minister in the Wiccan faith. And just go to the next one. I did radio with Pat Buchanan for 1.5 years. And then this went on for years. I was at the Supreme Court. And there, Oliver North, you heard of him? Do you know that Oliver North, I was on the radio with him every Friday for years. Do you know, he opposes the death penalty. Do you know that? No narrow reason. He just is against it. He doesn't think that the country has any moral right, no matter how serious the crime. And you find that with people, but you don't find it with them unless you look. Somebody told me to go do his radio show once. I said, come on, look at this guy, he's a warmonger. But when I found out that, and I found out he'd actually be willing to call governors to try to stop executions, I changed my whole mind about him. You know, you don't have to be right on everything. If you're right on something that's going to save somebody's life, that's probably good enough. So I had a good life. I mean, I have had a privileged life, not just as a white cisgender male, but I've had the privilege of working with an extraordinary number of people. And I was glad to have written these books. I'm happy, you know, when people go and buy it, you can go to my website, barrywlynn.com. You can get a good deal on it. But mainly, I just wanted to write down for myself and for my kids and grandkids that I've lived an exciting life. I've had a few laughs. I did a little good. It's probably all you can hope for in this life. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. My goodness, what a remarkable account of a remarkable life, and remarkable standing up for incredible panoply of different issues and values. We are so honored that we were able to present you and also to have this on our YouTube archive for the world to see. And so tell folks about this story. We will have a few copies of the book here at the church if you'd like to pick up a copy. We will also have a copy in our library signed by Barry and Joanne. So stop by the church and say hello to us. The COVID emergency is over. You can come. You can enjoy this beautiful auditorium space, all the books we have, all the beautiful imagery on the walls. if you would like to join, we have the membership book, and you could add your name to our membership list. And if you'd rather not, for whatever reason, that's fine too. I would like to also invite you to help us make this happen with your financial contribution. Our website is communitychurchofboston.org. There is a PayPal and credit card option on that website, and you can help us make this happen. We have enormous expenses around this building, and we do our best to apply for grants to help us do major capital work on this building. And that's a process that is ongoing, long-term. And we have our day-to-day operations, which is 5 part-time folks, myself included, and Amar included, who is behind the controls in the back. Thank you, Amar, for all the good, indispensable work you do. And Charlie, who's not on the payroll, but Crystal Rollins Jackson and Zinli Zhu, our accountant bookkeeper. So help us make this thing happen. I want to invite Cozy to give us one last number.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Barry. That was fascinating. Love the idea you need to keep your sense of humor in all this. Sometimes all this looks a little overwhelming, I think. I often feel overwhelmed by, just trying to be a good human in the world and doing what's best. What if it'll be okay? What if it works out right? What if there is a new day after this night? What if we turn the corner? What if we make it through? My world is warmer when my world has you. We fall, my friend. We fall, and we get up again. I like stories, once upon a time. I like when your hand reaches for mine. If we lean in where it hurts, lean into the mistake. If we lean in where we break, we fall, my friend. We fall, and we get up again. Forgive me, I'll forgive you. And that's all we have to do. What if it'll be okay? What if it works out right? What if there is a new day after this night? We fall, my friend. We fall, we get up again. Thank you.
Wow, Cozy. That's beautiful. Really beautiful song. Just so simple. This is such a clear voice to be reckoned with, Cozy Sheridan. Thank you so much. I gotta pull myself together here because we have a Q&A now with Barry. And I wonder if there's anybody in the room or anybody online. First dibs to say hello or to ask a question of Barry. And I am so happy that you took a full amount of time. People ask, do you want to, how much time should I take? And I say, well, we like to have lunch by 1, but it just so happens that Daniel Ellsberg talked for 2 hours when he received our Sacco Vanzetti Award, and we were in rapt attention. So time, what's time to people? You know, we can go on as long as we want. There's no union telling us to stop. There's nothing but lunch. So here's Barry again.
Other question? How will I know? How will I know?
If there aren't any, well, I have one.
Okay. Okay.
Let me
Sure.
take this to Karin. Here, Karin.
Oh, you need this. Okay. A personal thank you, of course, as I've said to you. It's really remarkable. You did a lot of good, not just a little, a lot. I'm a retired faculty member with lots of friends in that same situation. We're fortunate enough to still be alive and frustrated by what can we do now, because these marches, moms demand action. I mean, there's so many issues, all the reproductive rights issues, the transgender issues, the LGBTQ issues, the library and book issues, and of course the gun issues. We've been going to marches, writing letters, sending postcards for a long time now, and we seem to have an intransigent legal system that has been built under our noses in a way. Who knew? Who knew that this cuckoo judge is there in Texas who can have an edict that affects the whole country? So I would like a little guidance, because I have a friend who organized something called Grandmothers for something or other and for political purposes, but she's sort of retired. But I'm trying to encourage her to reorganize Grandmothers. And what can we do now that could really have an effect? I know we can't do everything, but we do believe that old trite but true statement, just because I can't do everything doesn't mean I can't do something. But we need a something. We need a focus, a kind of action focus.
This is a very good question. And I think if I were to start my career over, I would be interested in one thing. And that would be to clean up the courts. I mean, you're onto something. We cannot do anything unless the United States Supreme Court has changed dramatically. And that means expanding it. And now a lot of people are on this bandwagon. But 2 or 3 years ago, when I started talking about we should add more seats to the Supreme Court, the really progressive people would say, well, I mean, if we add a couple, then the next time the Republicans get in, they'll add some more. Let's worry about that if that happens. But if we don't clean up the court, I mentioned that there's nothing funny about the gun thing. I mean, somebody asked me at another event a few weeks ago, is there any issue you couldn't work on? And the issue would be guns, because I have been hearing the same arguments about how we need to protect ourselves from the bad guys by having more guns. The same ones I was hearing in 1972. I was on the board of something called the National Coalition to Ban Handguns. Even they got nervous. Ban handguns? Maybe we should just be more like gun safety. No, we should ban handguns. But the court is going to turn down the Supreme Court will reject every effort to regulate guns, every one. Don't get fooled when they pause, you just let something go in effect, some new Chicago. On the merits, they're going to say, you can't do that. Another judge just said that if you were 18, you could not be barred between 18 and 21 having a semi-automatic assault rifle. I mean, so this has to be changed. And that means the court has to have 4 new members. And we should not be embarrassed about saying the kind of judges we want. We want people who understand that there is a living Constitution. It's not a dead one, and that it doesn't really matter what the focus of was 206 years ago. It matters what it should do now. My friend, who is the dean of Stanford Law School, said the alternative to a living Constitution is a dead one. And who would want to have that? And that's what we need to do. There are principles rooted in the Constitution. We need to apply those, and we better make sure that the religious and secular right doesn't get to pick more and more justices, not just to the Supreme Court. Only 2% of the cases in the country end up in the Supreme Court. But the appeals courts have been just as corrupted by years and years of activity on the part of the right. That's the single thing that's got to be changed. We can elect some better people, but we got to change the courts. You're really onto something that needs to be done by grandmothers. If you find some great grandmothers, they can join you too, because that's what it's all about.
Go ahead, Amar.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. So my question is, what would you say to people like me who say that the Democrats are the more pro-censorship party now, calling for censorship on social media and other places?
Are the most what?
They're the more pro-censorship party now, the Democrats.
There are a lot of people who want to censor things that were Democrats, but I think that censorship is rooted and is rotted in the Republican Party much more. They find reasons to oppose everything, and Democrats too. I mean, I think that you could make a strong case that some of the policies of the ACLU are not defensive enough of the right of conservatives, for example, to speak at college campuses. I mean, I talked to one of the former board presidents a couple of years ago of the ACLU who said, why is the ACLU not complaining when a college or university says, oh, we're not going to have so-and-so as a speaker because she's too conservative? I mean, we have to fight that, but we're not fighting, and the Democrats are not just wrong about that, but I mean, the Republican Party is wrong about everything when it comes to speech. I mean, it's this is an example. There was a woman in Florida that was forced to resign from her school because she showed a photograph of Michelangelo's statue of David because there's a penis in it. That's something the Porn Commission actually had a debate over. By a narrow vote, they decided it wasn't pornographic. But now here it is, 25 years later, and in Florida, a woman can't even show a photograph of this famous statue because people in the community who are not Democrats, I bet they're 98% of them are Republicans, have said, look at this, shocking. We must get rid of that picture. We can't show that picture. I mean, this is where we are. We are reverting into the worst of our instincts at a time when we ought to be growing up.
Barry, I like what you had to say about how if we're, in order to really understand the true motivations of our adversary, we can't let like our hatred go toward them, because that kind of makes a barrier, as far as being able to really consider and understand our adversary and where they're coming from. And then which sort of leads me to my question, which maybe relates to you more as a reverend. Socrates had this quote that ignorance is the root of all evil. And I was wondering, how you feel about that. If you had any insights about your belief about whether ignorance is the root of all evil.
Is ignorance the root of all evil? If it's not, it's really close to whatever is third. I mean, of course it is, because, and this is the goal. Why do you think the right hates public schools so much? Because it's the one possible opportunity for people to get together with other people who feel differently and learn from each other. They hate public schools. Jerry Falwell used to say that he hoped he would live to see the day when there would be no public schools in America, because the churches would have taken them all over by then. He hates public schools. Many of these people, Phyllis Schlafly, I mean, in one of these books, I talk a lot about a debate I had with her about public schools. I mean, she is living in an absolute fantasy, was living in an absolute fantasy world, where if you don't let people understand things, they think it will be good. But people like, I think, Socrates would say, no, you have to be willing to let young people and all people learn, because if you don't, you stagnate and you reach a point where nothing ever gets done. The people, the religious right, they were opposed to a book which happens that Joanne and I are reading to our granddaughters, called Charlotte's Web. You know what Charlotte's Web is about? It's about a pig who has a friendship with a spider, and they talk. And you think, well, what's wrong with that? The religious right said, because animals don't talk in the Bible, therefore talking animals are sinful. Now, I mean, it sounds so stupid, but then the very last thing I was invited to do on the Fox News channel, which I used to do a lot, but I just passed on this one. They said they wanted me to come on Saturday morning and have a debate with a guy who had done a new cartoon series. And I said, well, what's it about? And they said, well, his position is if you don't watch his cartoon series, if as a parent you allow your children to watch any other cartoon, you are turning them into atheists. I said, what's his cartoon series? And he said, it's something called Veggie Tales. And I actually know what Veggie Tales is. It's when vegetables act out Bible stories and talk. So apparently somewhere between animals talking being a sin and vegetables talking and teaching your kids how to be good Christians, something has changed. I just don't know what it was. But ignorance is the worst. People who do not read. I talked about Bob Scheer a couple times. When he had a chance to meet with Henry Hudson and visit Arlington County and look at what was available in the newsstands, he was so shocked. Then he went in and interviewed Hudson, and Hudson admitted, he said, you know, I haven't read a book in years. I have not read a book in years. He's now a federal judge, by the way. But see, it goes back. There's something royally wrong with the judicial system. I hope that answers you.
We have a question from the matron grandmother of us all here at Community Church. Her name is Tilly Teixeira. Go ahead, Tilly.
Hi. Couple of comments. One is I grew up learning that machine guns got banned because people were not terribly political, but horrified at the slaughter of gangsterism, blah, blah, blah. That's one, question on, no, you do go after the gun stuff. And by the way, I was taught at the age of 12 how to shoot a .22. Okay. That's one. But the other is when we're talking about the Supreme Court and change, when I'm thinking of the 14th Amendment But the other piece is, don't forget to talk to your neighbor. And that includes my summer Cape landlord on a lake, who is Trump. But my husband settled his hash years ago. We talk, and we talk about the environment. But there are issues that you reach your people that you talk to, and yes, I do talk to my next door neighbors and et cetera, et cetera. But the issue of gun violence, we have to go after. And on the Supreme Court, I'm not sure, because I'm an old history person, and whether the change in number does it. But one issue certainly should go after is the whole ethics question, which has nothing to do with, quote, elections, all right? And you know, and I'm not talking about party stuff, you know, and believe me, I talk to all parties, Republican, Democrat, and Communist, all right? Yep. But we can talk. Okay, so I'm going to leave that.
Yeah, I think we need to keep talking. We need to keep talking to everybody. I think there are people, though, that, you know, I don't want to sound Pollyannish about this. I mean, if you can't get anywhere with talking to the neighbor on the left side and talk to the neighbor on the right side, and then go down the street and talk to somebody down there, if you get bored with both of them, or both of them aren't listening to you. But I think that the numbers do make a difference. I think if you had 13 members on the court, current court, you would have I think it would make a dramatic shift. I think there's no question that there would be a much better understanding of the consequences of guns, a much better. And when you talk about the quality, the ethics of the members of the Supreme Court, remember Clarence Thomas, when he was being considered for his seat on the Supreme Court, he said he had never talked about Roe versus Wade. He had never talked about it. Now he's a medical expert, and he knows exactly what women's health care should be, how it should be done, what should be permitted and what should not be. And now he has the nerve to say he hadn't even thought that it might be unethical to accept vast hundreds of thousands of dollars from people who were giving him money for trips for he and his Federalist Society spouse, Ginny Thomas. You know, it's shocking. This man apparently never talked about anything. Now is confused only about the things that he doesn't want to notice. And it combined with the fact that, you know, he is, I am completely convinced he's a sex abuser, as is Brett Kavanaugh, who doesn't deserve to be on the court. Brett Kavanaugh is not just didn't have so-called woman trouble when he was nominated. He was not even particularly well qualified to do anything. He's one of thousands of lawyers in Washington, D.C. who play by the rules, and now he has a chance to make up some new ones. But these are not capable people. These are not people who we need to hold and endearingly to our hearts.
I have a little question. Hilly Teixeira, who was just with us, probably the senior member of our congregation, is Jewish. She was married in this congregation in the early 50s, and the reason was because it was what they called a mixed marriage, which in that day and age was scandal, shame. They found a place here, and this was true for many of weddings that Lothrop performed during the 39 years he was minister here. And our next questioner is also a very observant Jew. His name is Steve Kellerman. And so my question is about a menorah that goes up in Copley Square every Hanukkah. And I mean, I love Hanukkah. I love the candles, and I love the celebration. Miko Peled, who is a remarkable voice who has spoken here sometimes, disagrees. He thinks it's a very nationalist Jewish observance. But the question is this this group has been putting up this menorah every year. And it's a really ugly menorah. That's my own personal opinion. And it has some little neon lights up top, and it lights every night of the Hanukkah season. I don't think anybody has ever dared question it. It so happens that the group that does this is ultra Zionist, and I want nothing to do with them, but nobody has questioned it. Or what do you think? Should it be there or should it not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think it should be there, but let's explain what it is. What property is it on?
It's on public property.
It shouldn't be there.
Boston Public Library.
Yeah.
Copley Square.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't be there. And I'll bet, let me ask you this. Did the menorah, was that the very first symbol, or was there a cross there or a nativity scene 20 years ago?
I've never seen a nativity scene there in
Yeah,
my
wow.
25 years here.
Really? Well, then it shouldn't be there either. I mean, whether it's there. Yeah, I mean, so here's what somebody ought to do. A Wiccan group, a pagan group, an Islamic group ought to try to put up its symbol there. And if it doesn't.
How about a UU group that wants to put up a Sacco and Vanzetti?
That would be very religious. Yes. No. I mean, yes, you could say this is a moral question, and you should try to put it up there. You would get a huge amount of attendance at any demonstration you do, because it doesn't matter what it is. If it's fundamentally a religious symbol, it's there celebrating a religious observance of one tradition. It does not belong on public property. It just doesn't.
Thank you, Barry. A bunch more questions I have that I'll have over lunch. But we do have Steve Kellerman online. Hi, Steve. Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, hi, Dean. Yeah, Barry, thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful. And I want to say I am an observant Jew, and I'm a current member of the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. And I think the organization does wonderful work. And I also do not want to see religious anything on public property. I think it's a violation of the First Amendment. But I have one question about the people who say that it's sinful to have talking animals in a cartoon. What do they think about the serpent in the Garden of Eden who speaks to Eve and to Balaam's ass?
Yeah. You see, people like you and I know too much about the Bible, right? So, but here's what, you can never argue the argument you just made. I wish when you say, what about the snake spoke to Eve? They would find a reason why that was different than the talking animals in Charlotte's Web. It is very difficult to defeat Bible believers, Christians, Jews, by arguing with them based on their holy text, because they will not. Here's an example. What does the Bible, the new so-called New Testament or the Old Testament, what does it say about guns? Do you know? What does it say about guns? It does say something. Oh, it says a lot. The book of the Revelation of St. John has a phrase, the rod of iron. That's guns. No, this is so ridiculous. There was a church in Western Pennsylvania that did a service a couple of years ago where they did two things. You were supposed to come and renew your wedding vows, and they would do a blessing of your assault rifles. And when asked, well, where is this in the Bible? They said, checked out the Revelation of St. John. It's got rod of iron. That must be a gun. Okay. What are you going to do? It's, yeah, I mean, getting a little laughter here. It is. It's just very, very, I do every month or so, I do a half hour or so on John Fugelsang's show on XM Sirius, if you get that on the Progressive channel. And he's a real, his mother had been a nun. His father had been a Franciscan brother. And he knows a lot about the Bible. And whenever anybody tries to call him, particularly if I'm on at the same time, these people will come up with these quotations from the Bible. And when you give them any alternative, they simply say, well, we've done away, we've changed that. There's a wonderful passage that a guy that I used to do radio with used to use all the time. He believed, he was a Christian Reconstructionist. Which means he wants all of the Levitical codes to become part of American law, the prohibitions against eating shellfish. And this guy, I should say to his credit, he lived that way. He never wore a clothing of mixed fabric. And then if you said to him, John, but what about Jesus? What about the Sermon on the Mount? He'd quote Jesus right back and he'd say, Jesus said, I have come not to change one word of the law, which he reportedly did say. But that was a complete answer. There was nothing else. There was just, here's another quote. Here's a quote. It's really hard to beat them if that's the only argument you have. Alan Dershowitz, before he kind of went on to the whatever side he's on now, but I was talking to him once and I said, well, Alan, how about this? Why don't you put this question? He said he was going to put this question on his final exam in constitutional law. Let's say that you have a legislature that is debating the death penalty. And the only objections to the death penalty uttered by any of the people who want it abolished is that when Jesus is commenting on the stoning of a prostitute, says, stop this, let he who is perfect cast the first stone. And Alan said, that's a good question. I think if you can't come up for a better answer to the death penalty than one sentence in the Christian Bible, you probably ought to get it. You ought to become a pastor and stop being a legislator. You can't make decisions in this country solely on the basis of a quote from anyone's holy scripture. That doesn't mean you don't have moral guidance. That doesn't mean you have a deep sense of ethics, but it does mean proof texting is no way to make policy in any government building, in any government entity, in my view.
Yeah, I would say I feel an obligation not to wear shotness, the combining wool and
Sure.
Linen. On the other
Right.
hand, in a million years, I would never impose that on anybody else.
Right, right. Unfortunately, that's a good thing. But there are plenty of people, including Christians, who would, following what I just mentioned, would say, if it's in the so-called Old Testament, it is the law that should be adopted and required of everyone in this country, regardless of their religious background, if any. Talking carrots, rods of iron, he could like fall apart.
I can hardly wait over lunch to play you a song by our favorite political satirist songwriter, Roy Zimmerman. Do you know that name? Oh, there's a song called "Marriage in the Bible." You heard that one? Yeah. Oh, fabulous. Kevin Devine will be our last commentator. Hi, Kevin. Welcome. You're muted, Kevin. You must unmute. You're still muted, Kevin. I wish we could unmute you from here, but we are not able to. It's on the bottom left of your screen, and there's a little microphone. There's a little microphone, and you click on that microphone and it unmutes you so you can be heard by all of us all over the planet listening to you, Mr. Kevin Devine, Mr. Longtime member of Community Church, joining us from down in Braintree, and Nancy, who is also joining us as the technical assistant. Oh, yes, I heard it for just a second. There was sound. Click on the little microphone to the lower left.
Actually, okay, can you hear me now? Oh,
yes, but I can only see there. I can see your whole face. Hi, Kevin.
Hi. Yeah, I've been listening to this talk by Reverend Lynn, Barry Lynn. I'm having a lot of things. I mean, I'm just thinking about one thing is going through my mind is about this talk of the Supreme Court. I heard your conversation about Clarence Thomas, and he doesn't seem to engage in much conversation involving issues that are important to the people of this country. So he seems to be only interested in what his agenda is. So I'm just thinking about myself about couple of things that he seems to be not. I don't know. He seems to be for the defense of arms, weapons, meaning what is it? AR-15s, people like that. That's what's been going on over the past couple of months now. People, it seems like every couple of weeks, or even every week, about every week, somebody is shooting someone, acting out because they're frustrated with someone. I don't know, and it's usually under the guidance that it's about the right to bear arms. What is it? The Second Amendment of the Constitution that does that. So yeah, I just was wondering if you could. It's like an epidemic, and I'm just concerned about this. I heard you say that we could expand the number of members of the Supreme Court. Is there something else that we could do? Can you think? Is there something other than expanding the number of Supreme Court justices? All right, thank you.
Well, the sad news is if a court case goes to the Supreme Court with its current configuration, it will fail. I mean, any effort. Remember what Clarence Thomas, when he wrote in that Supreme Court decision last year, he said that the state of New York did not have the right to ask people for the reason they needed a concealed carry permit. This is New York City. New York City, a violent place.
Yeah.
He didn't think there was any problem with saying that, because as he understands the history of the founding of the Republic and of the writing of the Constitution, that the keeping of and bearing of arms is absolutely guaranteed. You can't ask somebody to keep and bear arms only if they have a good reason to need to do so. Now, if that violates the Second Amendment in Clarence Thomas's view, what doesn't violate? I mean,
Yeah.
that's about handguns. It wasn't even about semi-automatic rifles. It wasn't about. There was a guy when I used to do radio with Pat Buchanan, that I did for about a year and a half. There was a friend of his who ran a group that thought the National Rifle Association was too moderate, called Gun Owners of America. And they seemed to take the position that any gun that you could use on a battlefield today, private citizens also had the right to own and operate. Now there really are battlefield nuclear weapons that you can carry on to the battlefield. So presumably they would say, well, if the government can have it, the citizens have it. And remember, this is rooted in this deep fantasy that the federal government and most of the states, certainly Massachusetts, is coming to take you away, that you better defend yourself because the government is out to you. This is so preposterous, but it motivates a huge percentage of the very small percentage of people who do not believe there should be any serious regulation of guns. The public wants gun regulation. They want it. The National Rifle Association, which of course isn't operating just by itself, it's for the four big gun manufacturers, pay for it. It just sweeps away the opposition in local and state elections.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Barry. I think we're coming to a close because lunch is served. Thank you, Luis, for lunch, as happens every Sunday all the way through June 11th, which is our last meeting and also our annual meeting. So join us for upcoming events. I am just flummoxed and flabbergasted by what wonderful programs we have had in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And it's really a magnificent thing. And we are just starting to think about next fall. And we hope you will help us, make suggestions, have a voice in what we do here at Community Church, and tell us what you don't like too. So with that, I say, brothers, sisters, now our meeting is over. Brothers, we must part. Sisters, now our meeting is over. I will hold you in my heart, and we'll land on the shore, and we'll land on the shore, and we'll land on the shore and be safe forever more. And now let's have